Swede here of the Gamer's Closet on my weekly live stream for Closet Chat. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about war games. War games are a thing that's always been near and dear to my heart, and figured it's about time that they get a little bit of their due. So first off, when I start talking about war games, I want to bring up the book that I picked up recently, which I started to read, which is a little surprising if you don't know the history of it. There is the Little Wars book. Little Wars is a book that was printed in 1912, 1913, and was written by H.G. Wells. You may know from War of the Worlds, The Time Machine, other works of fiction that are classics. But H.G. Wells was a avid wargamer. When war games were very complex, used by the Prussian British armies using Kriegspiel, which is a very heavy, not realistic war game used for tactics, H.G. Wells came up with something a little more simplistic. H.G. Wells had a dinner party with several of his friends, including noted author Robert Louis Stevenson from Treasure Island and Jekyll and Hyde. And they started playing with toy cannons and metal figures, like 2-inch metal soldiers, like kids' toys at the time. And they started developing more and more rules. They started developing buildings. They started developing tactics of how to maneuver bridges. So H.G. Wells is pretty much the architect of modern casual wargaming. So a lot of games today, like if you've looked at my channel, you see I did a live stream on Dust. Dusts with military units and things of that nature are basically owing their origin to H.G. Wells. Same thing with a lot of modern board games. For example, a game that I have here is Stratego Waterloo. Stratego Waterloo is a version of Stratego where you have to play as the British or French armies. The French have an advantage, but the British later in the game have more forces that can come in when the Prussian army shows up. This is a game that's still available today. The wonderful people at Play Monster Games were nice enough to send me a copy of it, which I hope to sit down, hopefully this next weekend, and play through it. It is a 2-player game of Stratego, but it has rules for terrain, it has rules for weather conditions, so it is a version of Stratego that is heavily advanced compared to the basic one. So wargaming has evolved a lot. I've gone to conventions where you'll watch massive battles like the Battle of Waterloo being replayed. I remember I went to a convention and someone had built downtown Baghdad and had military tanks and infantry roaming from street to street in the battles of Baghdad with little Saddam Hussein statues and everything. So they get really complex and they get very heavy to play, meaning you really want to attack it. You really get heated when you're playing. Things do not go your way. You are a tabletop general, and you feel the joys of victory and the bitterness of defeat both on that table. But like I said, board games are the same way. If you have some board games, pardon me, the camera, I should have to inadvertently bump it, but some board games, which I do want to go over some of the military board games that you can pick up on the market. Some are relatively available. Some you can actually pick up on eBay. They're out of print, but you can still find copies of them in relative value. I do have several recommendations here, which I do want to go over. Like I said, the first one I picked up was Stratego Waterloo. I'm always a fan of Stratego. I've never found a version I don't like. I've played The classic version, I've played the reprints from Play Monster, which are a little bit different because they're not using the Milton Bradley numbering system. They're using the European numbering system. So the Field Marshal, instead of being a 1, is a 10, and vice versa. You know, the Scouts are not 9s, they're 1s in the European system. But for overall what it is, the game is still pretty straightforward. Um, Another version, another game I recommend highly to pick up, would be TSR's The Hunt for Red October board game. Let me back up, the box is a little big on this. This is a 2-player game. The Hunt for Red October board game, you can play the movie, The Hunt for Red October, where you have to dodge the Soviet high seas fleet, but it has several other scenarios. So you can have the Allied navies versus the Soviet navies. You can get into mock war games. You actually can do World War III in here. You're not quite sure what units are what because they're tailor specific to aim at one side of the table versus the other side. So there is a phantom ship element to it. So you're not quite sure what naval units are where. So you have to go through and do a lot of exploration on it, or you can get faked out by units that aren't exactly real and get, I mean, the game itself has a lot of strategy to it. TSR games are a little harder to find, and generally they're a little bit more expensive than normal war games you'll find, like Red Storm Rising. There's a bunch of them. There's one, I can't remember the name of it offhand, where you have to go in and redo the battles through Desert Storm in the 90s with the Allied forces versus the Iraqi army. There are a lot of really well-built TSR games, and I don't think that TSR gets the credit that they're due on board games. Most people think if it's a board game, it's going to be Milton Bradley or it's going to be Parker Brothers or something on the family-friendly end versus the TSR complex end. Another good example for some of the complex ends, which are games that I highly recommend, are I'm a fan of old Avalon Hill. Avalon Hill is a game where you have 16-page rule books where you can play as a beginner version, or they have advanced rules so you can play heavier rules. You can get into weather conditions, you can get into storm fronts, terrain, mud, unit exhaustion. A good example, this is Luftwaffe, one of their bookcase games where you can play aerial combat over Germany from 1943 to 1945. All the pieces are cardboard. They're really easy to get lost, but you can actually get nice replacement pieces online. Someone was able to graphically design new pieces, so they look a little sharper and nicer, but you can buy them online relatively easily, especially since Old Avalon Hill is no longer producing pieces. Because back in the day, you used to be able to log into their catalog and mail away for a reprint of whatever you wanted. You could reprint a whole sheet of pieces. If you lost something, you could reprint boards and they'd mail them to you, whatever. But unfortunately, since Hasbro took over, they don't do that anymore, which makes Old Avalon Hill games, if they're incomplete, kind of a pain in the neck. But like I said, you can go online and find replacement parts on some of these, which I think is a great thing for these, especially bringing new life into them. A lot of the newer generations of wargamers have heard about Avalon Hill back in the day. And don't get me wrong, there's some really bad Avalon Hill games, but a lot of their war games are pretty decent. I'm a fan of Luftwaffe. Another one that I think doesn't get enough due is Panzer Leader. Panzer Leader is a great game. You can play it in conjunction with Squad Leader. You can play it in conjunction with Panzer Blitz. There's several scenario packs like Cross of Iron and Crescendo of Doom that you could add to these games. So they make it interesting. Some of these games go online for $40, $50, $100 if you can find them. But like I said, they are well worth the effort and the money if you want to pick up a really quality war game. So I'm a high fan of Panzer Leader. Panzer Leader is a tactical warfare game on the Western Front from 44 to 45. It has a really nice rule book. It has some nice scenarios in it. And like I said, you can go add additional scenarios if you really want to. So Panzer Leader is a great game. Oh, nice to see you, Craig. I'm glad you love Panzer Leader. So do I. I love playing this game. Um, like I said, I'm a big fan of the expansions like Cross of Iron, Crescendo of Doom, uh, but there's a whole bunch of these around. Another thing I'm a fan of are some of the Avalon Hill big box games. They're not like the bookcase games, but like for example, the Battle of Gettysburg. Battle of Gettysburg is a great game. It's very well built. It's well organized. I don't think it gets the credit it's due. There's several different printing versions of this one. This one here is the most common from the 70s. But as you can see from here from the back, it's got the really cool Avalon Hill hex-based board game. It's got the little square pieces, which, don't get me wrong, they can get lost really easily. But for what the game is, I think it's a very well-built game. This one is I'm gonna do a review on this one and go over the rules on this one coming at some point soon. It just has a really long rule book. Like I said, Avalon Hill games can have up to 16-page, 20-page rule books. So I have to streamline these to make them videoable. One that I have done a video on, which I encourage you to check out if you haven't looked it out, and is one of my personal favorite Avalon Hill games, which nobody remembers this game for whatever reason until you start talking about it, and then you'll have a group of 5 or 6 people like, oh yeah, I remember that. Jutland. Jutland is a crazy, crazy Avalon Hill board game. Because why? It's a board game without a board. You can play this anywhere. I have seen this game played on tables, carpets. I have seen this game played on concrete sidewalks outside of a convention. You have charts for this game, and then you actually have an area where you can have naval ships, which they're all cardboard pieces, come onto boards, and then you have maneuver cards on there, so that way it shows them the maneuver. This game can be played anywhere. Jutland is a World War I naval combat game. I'm glad you have it, Craig. This, for whatever reason, every time I talk about this game, nobody ever remembers it until I start talking about it. Jutland is a fantastic Avalon Hill game. If you have not played Jutland, I strongly recommend you pick up this game because I have had a great time with this, playing multiple different people. I pull this game out when conventions get slow, and I always get a crowd of people around me that remember this game and want to play this game. But it's a couple of players, so you have the British Navy and the German Imperial Navy. It's a heck of a game if you haven't played it before. I strongly recommend playing Jutland. Into the non-Avalon Hill war games, which I do have a few examples here that I think some of them are good, some of them are a little simplistic. I'm a fan of Conquest. I did a video on this game. Unfortunately, the creator of this game passed away in a car accident, but luckily enough, his estate was able to finally get reprints of this game back onto the market. So there's Conquest, there's Super Conquest, there's several versions of Conquest. Some of them have catapult ships. You can get into naval combat. You can do a lot with Conquest. Conquest is like chess and Go mixed with military units. It is a heck of a game. If you haven't played Conquest before, I recommend picking it up. It's a little on the simplistic side with the way it's set up, but it's a really good gateway game if you want to get new war gamers in. Same thing like the next example I have here. It's a game dear and near to my heart, which I played this a lot when I was a kid, is Milton Bradley's Tank Battle. Tank Battle is a straight tank-to-tank military game, one-on-one. You can put mines in. You have anti-tank weapons. You have to deal with tanks getting across the board, which they follow in single lines, and then when they get to the other side, they're like checkers. They get command flags, and then they can kind of move around and do whatever they need to. Tank Battle is a game that I played a lot when I was a kid. It is a game that I think doesn't get the justice it deserves. They did come out with another game, which was Chopper Strike a year later, and I'm under the opinion that Tank Battle and Chopper Strike were kind of merged together for some of the newer Mission Command games, like Mission Command Ground, but they don't play the same. I think Tank Battle is better than Chopper Strike. Don't get me wrong, Chopper Strike is good. It's just it has that 3D element to it, where this is a ground pound. I'm going to figure out where I'm going to go, how I'm going to set this up. I got to dodge mines, tank to tank combat action. It's one of those really kind of simplistic Milton Bradley games that came out in the 70s, but I think it is a decent game for what it is. Like I said, I've played a lot of war games over the years. I used to play some of the Revell 1/72nd scale Civil War soldiers. I used to pull those out. My brother and I used to build whole military campaigns in our backyard. My mom used to get mad because she'd step on toothpicks accidentally, because we'd take all of her toothpicks and we would build Fort Apache style forts with gates and redouts on them. We would build fencing. We'd use broken concrete for rocks. We had infantry, cavalry, and artillery units where we'd have to measure out distances. At one point, we took a whole bunch of the old yellow Imperial margarine containers, like the smaller ones, wrapped them in aluminum foil with cut up toilet paper rolls and made ironclad. So then we actually flooded a portion of my mom's backyard with and had a naval sea combat on top of it. Wargaming is what you make of it. You can put a lot of imagination in it, you'll get a lot out of it. If you want just a basic war game, Tank Battle might be a good option for you. Something like that, basic Stratego might be a good option for you. Don't get me wrong, they're good games, but they're a little on the basic side. If you want something even crazier, a game that's very near and dear to my heart, which I played for entire summers when I was a teenager, is Axis and Allies. Axis and Allies is a game where you play 1942. You can play as the Allied forces or the Axis forces of World War II. So you can play as the British, the US, the Soviets, the Germans, and the Japanese. The later reprints of this game added the Italians into it. They added the Chinese into it. They added all kinds of things. But the original Axis and Allies is a crazy, crazy game. You can get into military research. You can get into ship combat. You can get into supply chains. There are places that have additional rules on this game. Surprisingly, I went to a convention a couple of years ago, and I picked up a copy of the World War II Axis and Allies expansion book. This book was put out by Gamers Paradise in Massachusetts, I believe. Let me double check that just to make sure. But you can find this online relatively easy. I'm sorry, Chicago. But they have things in here so you can get additional naval miniatures. You can get into movement. You can get into Wolfpack submarine combat. You can get into all this. There's a lot of peripheral material on some of these war games you can pick up. I have some for Risk. I've got some for Axis and Allies. I would strongly recommend, if you want to play a really good war game, find the peripheral material that's fan created, because a lot of it is really, really good. The copy I have here and one of the Risk copies, I am going to get turned into a downloadable PDF format, which I will add to my channel at some point. Probably on the bottom of this video, whenever I do Axis and Allies, I'll have a link to it. Those will come. But like I said, the peripheral material is really, really, really good. Yeah, I've I played Axis and Allies, Craig, for like I think a game lasted me at one point 3 months for a summer. Um, I played as the Axis forces. My brother played as the Allied forces, and it was just the two of us set up this table in our bedroom, and it went on for 3 months. We just played. We played several hours a day, and I mean, we went full intense on it. It was great. If you haven't played Axis and Allies, you are missing a great game. It's still in print today. There are multiple versions of it. You can play 1941. There's a Zombies edition. There's you can play Pacific or Europe. There's actually theaters of combat you can play. They have simplified versions of it. But if you can find the original Milton Bradley Game Master copy from the 80s, I strongly recommend you picking up that game because that game is amazing. Um, I'm a big fan of all of the Game Master series, Axis and Allies, Conquest of the Empire, Shogun, or Samurais and Swords, depending on what edition you have. Fortress America, even the two-player pirate one, Broadside and Boarding Parties, which didn't do very well because it's two-player versus the other copies, which are multiple players. That has a lot of really nice pieces to it. It has really good ship-to-ship combat in it. If you can pick up one of these Game Master games, I strongly recommend you picking them up because I have had a blast with them. I pulled Broadside and Boarding Parties out. One gaming convention, I had a crowd of people around me, and they haven't seen that game in 20 years, and it just appears. And you'll get a lot of people just talking about it, having memories about it, but nobody has it. It's just one of those games that everybody remembers, but no one ever bothered to pick up. So, like I said, Game Master games, I strongly recommend. A game that's also very near and dear to my heart, which I've had technical difficulties getting this game actually onto the channel. I had a review of this game and a rules version of this game, which is supposed to drop out on 4th of July weekend last weekend. That has not yet happened. I've had some technical difficulties on it, and I still am going to release it. It's just I'm dealing with YouTube and some of their weird difficulties on this game. But hopefully me showing this game won't have any further difficulties because, like I said, it's for whatever reason it's being their algorithm's being stupid. So I'm hoping to have that resolved probably this week sometime. But American Heritage's Skirmish by Milton Bradley. Milton Bradley had a whole bunch of American Heritage games. Skirmish, Broadsides, Dogfight. There's another one I can't remember which had a bunch of Marines landing on a beach. There's one called Battle Cry. These are one-on-one games. Skirmish is a game where you either can play as the Americans or the British and refight the American Revolution. The British start off at very, very strong military power because they have really large armies, but you can get reinforcements from the French. You can go through and build up your armies with all of the militias that are spread across the board for the Americans. So late game of that game, it can get really intense. Skirmish is a great game. I think it's also very underrated, which for whatever reason most people don't remember it. The American Heritage games, I think, are underrated, just like the Avalon Hill games. Don't get me wrong, they're simpler than the Avalon Hill stuff, but I think they're quality games. I've shown several options that I have here in my collection. I have many, many, many more. I'm a big fan of Avalon Hill. I'm a big fan of Milton Bradley, especially some of their older, crazier stuff. They had, I think Tank Battle only had one printing. So, and then they would come out and go and push onto something else, and then it would just get lost into the ether of Milton Bradley's vault and to never be seen again. When Hasbro took over, a lot of these games, they're not getting reprinted. They're not going to bother going down that road. Some of them have actually gotten picked up by other vendors. Shogun was picked up by another vendor. I think it's called Inuyasha or something like that now. Fortress America finally got a reprint after, I think, 20 years, which you can still find it today. But like I said, Axis and Allies has about 10 different variations now, but Conquest of the Empire finally got a reprint. Broadsides has yet to get a reprint, which I think it deserves it. Um, but some of these games, they're easy to pick up, some of them are not. eBay is a really good friend for some of these games, which I have picked up a couple of these off of eBay, but you have to be really picky on those because eBay games are notorious for missing parts, rule books, things of that nature. So if you're going to go down that road, I'd strongly recommend flipping through multiple options until you find one that's good. There are sealed copies every once in a while that you'll find on there, but the sealed copies are really expensive. I mean, $150 for a board game that's still sealed from the 1970s. So I'm always a big fan of wargaming. I'm a big fan of tabletop gaming. And like I said, I'm reading through Little Wars. Little Wars is an interesting game because it actually has a section in the back where they talk about a game of older wargaming between H.G. Wells and Robert Louis Stevenson, which I think is very interesting. The only thing about it is if you ever pick up this book, please remember this book was printed in 1913, 1912, and it's a little on the sexist side. I'll give you a couple examples. The title for this game is Little Wars, a game for boys from 12 years of age to 150, and for that more intelligent sort of girl who likes board games and books. So it just keeps going from there. But as for a book goes, like I said, it's written for the time it was printed in, but I think there's still a little bit of value in it that you can take on to modern wargaming, especially some of the Charles Grant stuff that's you can pick up. There's a ton of board gaming, war game books now. They tell you how to make buildings. They tell you how to do painting. Warhammer 40K actually has guides where you actually can. It tells you how to paint figurines to get into certain, make them look a certain way. There is Star Wars Legion now. You can get into space combat with Star Wars Armada. There's a lot of options if you want to do wargaming. So I strongly recommend taking a look at a lot of that stuff. Manufacturers have been releasing a lot of different war games over the years. Another good example is, like I showed you on my channel, I would recommend taking a look at Parker Brothers' Civil War 1863 game, which is the Union versus the Confederacy. That is an interesting game. You can play Battleship if you really want to go simplistic. You can play Strategia if you want to go simplistic. Parker Brothers came out with Conflict in the 40s, and they can't reprint it in the 70s, which is a pretty decent game. Or my personal favorite crazy war game is Supremacy. Supremacy is Risk with nuclear weapons and Third World warlords. You can do a lot with that game. I think I showed that on my last live stream. That is coming, but that is one of those Avalon Hill-like games where it has massive rule books, and I think it has like 16 expansions to it, depending on what you want. Those are coming. I'll open it up for any questions if anyone wants to ask me anything. I'm always a fan of tabletop wargaming. I did a lot of the Marx Little Green Armyman battles as a kid with my dad. We'd have a giant yellow table that kind of had a clear coating on the top of it, and we'd use grease pens for rivers, and we'd put in bridges and stuff like that. So we used to have military combat that way. Some of the old military sets from the March toys from the 60s. We used some of that stuff like trees and tanks and half tracks and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I've done wargaming for almost my entire life, and I think it's given me a little more focus on things because it allows me to strategically think or logistically think about how I'm doing things. So I think it's helped me in my normal adult life of how to do things. So I recommend wargaming as a kind of like a mind training game, as it were, because you'll have people that, on their phones or tablets, and they do memory training and things like that. Wargaming is a really good option for that, because it gives you critical thinking, gives you logistics, how to do things, uh, how to set up things in a very specific way. So I think it helps in your adult life and how you can do normal jobs. I mean, my job I deal with professionally is I do inventory control, so it allows me how to plan things out, how I'm doing things. So I think logistical critical thinking came from wargaming. So doesn't look like anyone has any questions. I know, Craig, you're watching. Do you have anything you want to ask? Like I said, it's I'm always a big fan of wargaming. I'm always a big fan of tabletop gaming. I think gaming in general is a great avenue to spend quality time with friends, family, have great for family nights. I have some very good memories with my dad, who's sadly no longer with us. But I think I got a lot out of that as a kid. So, so if there's no questions, then I'm going to thank you for watching. Again, I'm going to have some gaming drop out again on my channel. I'm hoping to get it in. Thanks, Craig. I'm glad you liked it. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And hope to see you again next week. I plan on doing live streams every Saturday at noon. So please keep an eye out for it. If you have questions, link them to the live streams then when I post them, and I will answer them on the next live stream. And hope to see you then. Bye, everybody.